In Cassina, there was a man named Cornelius, yes, a centurion of the Italian cohort, as it was called. He was a devout man who feared God with all his household. He gave alms generously to the people and prayed consistently to God. One afternoon at about 3 o'clock, he had a vision in which he clearly saw an angel of God coming in and saying to him, "Cornelius." He stared at him in terror and said, "What is it, Lord?" He answered, "Your prayers and your alms have ascended as a memorial before God. Now send men to Joppa for a certain Simon who is called Peter. He is lodging with Simon, a tanner, whose house is by the seaside." When the angel who spoke to him had left, he called 2 of his slaves and a devout soldier from the ranks of those who served him, and after telling them everything, he sent them to Joppa. About noon the next day, as they were on their journey and approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray. He became hungry and wanted something to eat, and while it was being prepared, he fell into a trance. He saw the heaven open and something like a large sheet coming down, being lowered to the ground by its 4 corners. In it were all kinds of 4-footed creatures and reptiles and birds of the air. Then he heard a voice saying, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." But Peter said, "By no means, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is profane or unclean." The voice said to him again the second time, "What God has made clean, you must not call profane." This happened 3 times, and the thing was suddenly taken up to heaven. Now, while Peter was greatly puzzled about what to make of the vision that he had seen, suddenly the men sent by Cornelius appeared. They were asking for Simon's house and were standing by the gate. They called out to ask whether Simon, who was called Peter, was staying there. While Peter was still thinking about the vision, the Spirit said to him, "Look, 3 men are looking for you. Now get up, go down, and go with them without hesitation, for I have sent them." So Peter went down to the men and said, "I am the one you are looking for. What is the reason for your coming?" They answered, "Cornelius, a centurion, a righteous and God-fearing man who was well spoken of by the whole Jewish people, was directed by a holy angel to send for you to come to his house and to hear what you have said." So Peter invited them in and gave them lodging. The next day he got up and went with them, and some of the brothers and sisters from Joppa accompanied him. The following day they came to Caesarea. Cornelius was expecting them and had called together his relatives and close friends. On Peter's arrival, Cornelius met him and, falling at his feet, worshipped him. But Peter made him get up, saying, "Stand up, I am only mortal." And as he talked with him, he went in and found that many had assembled, and he said to them, "You yourselves know that it is improper for a Jew to associate with or to visit an outsider. But God has shown me that I should not call anyone profane or unclean. So when I was sent for, I came without objection. Now may I ask you why you sent for me?" Cornelius replied, 4 days, and at this very hour at 3 o'clock, I was praying in my house, when suddenly a man in dazzling clothes stood before me. He said, "Cornelius, your prayer has been heard, and your alms have been remembered before God. Send therefore to Joppa and ask for Simon, who is called Peter. He is staying in the home of Simon, a tanner by the sea. Therefore I sent for you immediately, and have you been kind enough to come? And you have been kind enough to come. So now all of us are here in the presence of God to listen to all that the Lord has commanded you to stay." Then Peter began to speak to them. "I truly understand that God shows no partiality, but in every people, everyone who fears him and practices righteousness is acceptable to him." Thanks be to God.
My friend David Berkey, Methodist minister who runs camps for them, for years has tried to get this story into the camp curriculum. And every year we meet with our design team and all of our representatives, and David says, Peter and Cornelius will be perfect for this day of the theme. Every year there's one day that it will be perfect for. And every year we say, David, it's just too long. Yes. Well, this last February it went into the curriculum. Sometimes it takes a while to get to this story, but it's worth it. Now, this is not our first encounter with a centurion. For those of you who are weekly or go back and listen to the YouTube channel or just have really amazing recall, you have better memory than I do. But we did have the story of Jesus healing a centurion just a few months ago. And we talked about how centurions are kind of middle management within the Roman Empire. This one gets a name, Cornelius. A respected person in the community, someone who already seems to be worshiping God. Kind of interesting, right? And it's not surprising that Cornelius was familiar with the Jewish community. That was part of their role as centurions. They were frontline fighters. They led smaller groups right at the front of battle. And if they survived, the reward was a nice, cushier appointment as they got older. They often went back to the places they had once fought to help keep the peace or to build up the kingdom, to be in charge of construction projects, community development. They had the respect of the troops for having been on the front line, and they also knew the ugliness of war, having been on the front line. Cornelius has servants, which would have been typical of someone in his day and his time in history. He also has soldiers that report to him, not all of which are trusted, it seems. He sends the trusted soldiers, also not untypical. Cornelius has a vision from God, and like many others, it bounces from an angel to the Lord in how the language works. But it seems strange that someone who is an outsider to the religious community would have such religious imagery. Have some words been put into his mouth to match the experience by those who know how to explain it better? Were angels more broadly understood in the culture of the day than we realize? We don't know, but it seems God was a fan of Cornelius. It seems people were fans of Cornelius. They liked him, they appreciated him. There was something about him that made him a trustworthy partner. Now, Peter, our other character, has a very different backstory, right? One of the original 12, the rock on which Jesus says the church will be built. Peter becomes the leader of the early church, and the Catholic Church still recognizes the Pope as standing in the tradition, taking on the mantle of Peter. He's also the one who denied Jesus when things got ugly. 3 times, right? You notice the image of God in the sheep comes to him how many times? 3, because apparently it takes 3 times for Peter to get anything. He's also the one who struggles to imagine non-Jews as people of God. Even though he was there for Jesus' teaching on clean and unclean with the Syrophoenician woman, where Jesus talks about what comes out of your mouth is what makes you unclean, not what goes in. He was there for the parable of the Good Samaritan, and still is struggling with what it means to be other and Jesus' message of welcome. So today, Peter gets a sheet full of unclean animals according to the rigid law. Peter is told to kill and eat, invited to, in his mind, break the law. But God's inviting Peter to reimagine inclusivity, to follow what Jesus had already taught, that his own biases had made very difficult to live into. Peter is truly a rock. He is strong and faithful. He is truly a rock, stubborn and slow to change. Some of our animals are having a hard time getting along out there, bless their hearts. In some ways, Peter might resemble the family member who's been told for years that scriptures have been manipulated to condemn them, to condemn the LGBTQ community. But until someone close enough to them comes out, they can't see it. Peter is wrestling with the message he's been taught and the biases he's been taught, with the word of the Lord and what somebody else told him was the word of the Lord. And then there's a centurion who's worshiping God with actually no formal education in it, no formal worship practice, and without the permissive identity of being Jewish. He's praying in his home, yet giving alms to the people in the community. These two, for some reason, God brings together these two. One is serving others and acting like a person of faith, even though they lack the language for it. The other is faithful, but sometimes gets lost in the limitations rather than possibilities. One is an outsider, the other is the ultimate insider in his community. One is secular and one is spiritual. One is Roman and one fears the empire. Rightfully so. Because in the centurion's world, Peter is the outsider, the marginalized one without power. These two. For some reason, God brings together these two. Can you imagine the assumptions they were already making about each other? As they get these visions, hey, this is the person I'm sending you to hang out with, and both of them have something come to mind. Now, before you say, oh, they're both faithful people, surely they don't have any biases or assumptions. Note that Cornelius sends those who can vouch for him on ahead. He doesn't go himself. He sends servants and soldiers who will vouch for his goodness as a person. He sends his references. And Peter, slow to get up and go welcome them, needs a nudge from the Holy Spirit to welcome Cornelius' people. We all make assumptions. We all have biases driven by our understanding of how it's always been. How it's always been is a loaded phrase, isn't it? First, it's just simply never true. When has someone said, well, that's the way it's always been, and it was accurate? Change is the only constant. The way it's always been. Second issue with that phrase is it's rarely been a good thing for the majority. The way it's always been is often a sad thing. And somehow we seem devoted to it, even when we're one of the ones being hurt. How many marginalized communities have held on to the way it's always been because it's the way it's always been? I heard a very wise person this week discussing why minority communities, especially people of color, are divided politically. One said, yes, we want, on one side, progress, change. We want to move towards these values that we know are important towards inclusivity, diversity for all. And others say, why would I trust anyone elected to make that change? They've only screwed us over in the past. The only one who you can ever actually take care of is yourself. So let's not come up with a bunch of policies that are supposed to help us that always have some hidden cost at the end. The way it's always been. It's hard to change. Poor people often vote against changes that would help their family. Marginalized people often vote against change that would empower them. LGBTQ community often feels so negative towards themselves, it's hard to advocate for themselves. I think we can all identify with that on some level. We've had a problem in our life and we didn't think we deserved better. We saw a problem, but we thought maybe it was too big for us to manage. We could dream of a better world, but we didn't feel like we had a right to it. Part of the problem is that those who have been hurt just don't trust those that promise change, even if it comes from God. Part of the problem is that change often has unintended downsides to it. We don't know them until we've got them. The other problem is just assumptions. Assumptions keep getting in our way. There are so many potential dangers in the world, and it seems like we're even more aware of them. They're well reported. The hurts of the world are even more well shared through social media. The imagined hurts of the world are even more shared through social media. The made-up hurts get in the way of the real hurts being shared on social media. And then there's our past attempts at fixing things. Attempts made by people with good intentions, like us. Attempts made by people unaware of their own biases. And so we have this fear of, if we wade into these waters to create change, what damage might we do? What are we unaware of still? And our fearfulness of assumptions keeps us from assuming things can be better. Many of our issues in the Middle East today stem from post-World War II division of land by European experts. Many of our issues in America today stem from post-World War II expression of normal by white upper-class elected officials, many still traumatized by war. Many of our issues in the church today stem from those who resemble Peter, faithful with good intentions, but seemingly unaware of their biases and struggling with the message of Jesus. Many of our issues in the church today are because we are unaware of our own biases and struggle with compassion. Peter and Cornelius' world was different than ours, but the people aren't. We resemble their struggles, don't we? Their biases, their assumptions, their desire to learn, to grow, to do better, to leave something behind, to pass something on, to pull family and friends together, to make this special thing that's about to happen something for everybody, but also something we're fearful of because we don't know what it's going to cost us. Struggling to let God open our hearts to others. And in the midst of that world, God brings together these two. Who might God bring together in our world? Who might God bring together today? If there is a way we've always done it in America, if there is a way we've always done it, it would probably be this: different people coming together. We like to tell the story different. We go back and paint it as a melting pot. They're all the same. They come together with all these shared values. But if we tell the story truthfully, the way we've always done it, the closest thing we can get to that in America is different people coming together. Different people coming together. Various Europeans met each other in a new world that was the same old world to those living here. Those Europeans had good intentions, but they were unaware of their biases. They did not see the disconnect between their bias and the faith that led many of them to hop on a boat and escape the faith of somebody else that was persecuting their faith. They didn't catch the irony and the cyclical nature of it all. Many of the folks who came to settle the place we call America today were faithful, but seemed to forget Jesus' teachings about inclusion. That's why we had 13 colonies, and 12 of them founded on the principle of religious freedom. If it was truly religious freedom, they would have only needed one. But we struggle with Jesus' teachings on inclusion. Along the way, we have found common bonds. and we've caused a lot of messes. We've found new common bonds forged by the messes we've made. But along the way, we built communities, churches, schools, and a culture, and caused some more messes, right? What if we could keep building? What if we could keep finding common bonds? But what if we could build with an awareness of our bias? What if we could build a future with an awareness of our bias so that we're building for everyone, not just for ours? What if we could find common bonds with everyone, not just in the easy connections? Who might God bring together today? Our sister congregation, neighborhood congregational down in Laguna Beach, is gearing up for a capital campaign. $5 million capital campaign, which in Laguna Beach, you call the tax on a big dinner bill, right? There's a lot of money in that community. But that's still a lot of money, right? $5 million for renovations. $5 million for renovations and facility changes. But none of it's for the church. They don't know how they're spending it yet. They know they're going to raise $5 million, and they're asking the city of Laguna Beach, the surrounding community, and the people who live there what they need space for that they don't feel safe going other places. They're asking the community, what needs do you have for gathering that no one is meeting? And how might we renovate our space to make space for you? Oh my goodness. Imagine building with an awareness that we have biases, and imagine building for everyone. Imagine finding common bonds with everyone, not just the easy connections of the people who believe like us. Who might God bring together today? The secular city, county, nonprofits, and a church that's got space. They're not just going to raise the money in their community, they're going to raise it in the community. And in it, they're going to raise the community. Who might God bring together today? We can watch the news and see who doesn't want to come together. But we can listen to each other's stories. And we know that when our lives changed, it's because God brought together people who are different. It's not someone who sees things the way we do that changes our life. It's somebody who sees it different. That's the reason intergenerational church transforms lives. If you get a group of teenagers together and ask them to discuss just war theory, if you get a group of senior adults together and ask them to discuss just war theory, the idea that you can justify a war, that there's some good point out of it, this moral ethical quandary, it's an ancient ethical question. Is there such thing as a just war? Get them together and have them talk about it. Kids today who have never known a moment of their life that the world was not at war, but it wasn't on their turf. Put them together with people who remember World War II, some of the older members who lived through the Vietnam conflict. Remember Korea. Either group can only learn as much as the experience of those in the room. What happens if you put them together and then throw in a couple of us Gen Xers who only lived through one war for most of our lives, and that was Desert Storm. It lasted 48 hours. It was on CNN, and it looked like a video game. Our understandings of war are dramatically different. The questions we ask, the worldview we have. Children born after 9/11 have a different worldview. What happens when they and the older generation start speaking to each other? How much have Rihanna and Mary have to teach each other? And how much can those of us in the middle glean from the conversation and the relationship? When we're different, we learn and grow. That's why the racist family member, the hateful LGBTQ bigot, the misogynist, the social justice warrior, the prayer partner, the Bible scholar, the compassionate cook, everyone in the family needs each other. We have things to learn from each other because sometimes we're 3 or 4 of those things at the same time, and they don't always logically match. Because you have Jesus teaching Peter about unclean, and later he's still getting the message. Sometimes we're slow and faithful at the same time. We can't just separate ourselves from the rest of Christendom and say, we're not part of that hateful, bigoted, anti-LGBTQ community. We're not part of that. We're our own church. No, we are part of the body of Jesus Christ. Some of us just get different lessons at different rates than others. And we can all be faithful and hurtful at the same time. We see it in Scripture. We can't say we're Bible-believing people and then not believe that people can be both loving and hateful at the same time. We also can't have the experience of growing up in the world we live in, or even listening to our own thoughts without believing we can be both beautiful and ugly at the same time. That God brings people together. It's how we grow. Who might God bring together today? What might we all do together?